So I developed an interest in sports and marketing. I grew up in the Atlanta area, and when you grow up in Atlanta, they teach you to do two things: drink Coca-Cola and eat Chick-fil-A. And so fast forward, I was the sports marketing director for Chick-fil-A, and I represented Chick-fil-A in our beverage marketing efforts with Coca-Cola and other beverage partners. So talk about a dream job. I mean, I loved that job. But I want to tell you what one of the worst days of my career was. And I want to tell you this to relate to those of you who've ever had a bad day at work. In fact, this is the only time I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. But for those of you who've ever had a bad day at work, can I see your hands for a second? Yeah, look around. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's most of us. If you didn't raise your hand, meaning that you've never had a bad day at work, on behalf of the rest of us, we hate you, okay? So I want to tell you my worst day at work, and it actually happened while I was at Chick-fil-A. Part of my role as a sports marketing director was to take the sports marketing properties that Chick-fil-A had invested in and were sponsoring and to create brand marketing impressions so that people would have a positive brand impression with Chick-fil-A in hopes that that would translate for them to eat more chicken. So that was kind of my role. One of the sports marketing properties that we have, and they still have it this day, is the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, a college football bowl game that featured at that time a team from the Atlantic Coast Conference and the Southeastern Conference. And as we were preparing for the 1998 Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl featuring the University of Virginia and the University of Georgia, go Dogs, I was sitting in the empty Georgia Dome preparing. We were brainstorming our team, and we were like, how can we create some great positive brand impressions? And so I sat down at a seat in the Georgia Dome. It was empty with just the exception of our team. And I looked at the seat, and I noticed there was a cup holder there at the seat. And I thought, oh, this is a good idea. What if we put 72,000 of these bad boys in the cup holders as a free gift from Chick-fil-A saying, hey, welcome to the game and eat more chicken? I mean, that would be an awesome idea. The problem is I didn't have money in my marketing budget to pay for 72,000 cows. But I knew someone who did. His name was Truett Cathy, the creator of the chicken sandwich and the founder of Chick-fil-A. So I get in my car, I call Truett's assistant. I said, hey, is Truett in today? She said, yes. I said, can I come see him? She said, yes. So I get to Chick-fil-A headquarters. I go in, I knock on Truett's door, and Truett says, come in, Jeff. And I sat down, I had this cow. Then Truett's desk, he had two chairs at the desk, but this is so cool. He was such a humble man, such a hero of mine. He had a chair next to his desk so he could be closer to you. Just awesome. So I sat down and I kind of pitched my idea to Truett and cast vision for why we needed to do this. But then I looked at him and said, Truett, but I don't have money in my budget, but rumor has it, you're doing pretty well. So will you help me and help you? Will you help me help you, Truett? Will you buy 72,000 cows? And Truett was a very generous man, but he grew up in the Great Depression, so he was very frugal. He always thought the Great Depression was one day away, right? So he said, Jeff, that's a lot of money, and I said, do you think we ought to do this? I said, yes, sir, Truett, I think we ought to do it. He said, all right. Let's go buy 72,000 cows. So it was awesome, all right? Now, I gotta figure out how to get 72,000 cows in the cup holders at the Georgia Dome because as my wife Wendy says, you're wow, but you're not how. You have absolutely no idea how to do any of this stuff, right? Which, by the way, you may wanna pray for the Gwinnett Church staff that they have to work with me, okay? So it took about a day and a half to put 72,000 cows in all the cup holders. But fast forward to the day of the game, as I mentioned, the Cavaliers against the Bulldogs, and 2 hours before the game, they were gonna open the gates, and I stood at the press box at the Georgia Dome. I just wanted to see what happened. And kids were coming down, and they were picking up their cow, and parents, they were giving each other hugs. It was awesome. I thought, this is such a great idea. Who thought of this idea, by the way? And so it was just amazing. So fast forward, 2 hours later, the game begins. And Virginia scores first, it's 7-0. Virginia scores again, 14-0. And we're not even out of the first quarter. Virginia scores again, it's 21-0. And the Georgia fans at the Georgia Dome are going, are we gonna get blown out today? But Georgia gets to kick off and they start heading toward their end zone. And they're gonna score and get back in this ball game. And on a third down play, an official drops a flag, kind of kills the drive. And the Georgia fans in their end zone, they just go nuts. Can't believe it. There's a guy in the end zone and he looks at his cup holder and he sees a cow in the cup holder. And he takes the cow and he throws it onto the field. Good catch. And guess what happens next? 15,000 of his closest friends take their cows and they throw them onto the field. And I'm in the press box and I'm sitting there and I'm seeing my marketing career flash before my eyes. Y'all, They had to delay the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl and sweep all the dead little cows off of the field. Again, as I'm in the press box, a guy from the media says, who was the marketing genius that came up with this idea? And so as a result of that, I became a pastor. That's kind of how I got there, okay? So I know what it's like to have a bad day at work, all right? But in fact, my bad day happened in front of 72,000 people at the Georgia Dome and before a nationally televised audience on ESPN. So I understand that. But in the midst of bad days, bad seasons, difficult conversations, difficult boss, difficult work environments, I think in the middle of all of that, we can experience God's original intent of why he created work. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna rebuild our perspective. We're gonna go back from the very beginning. We're gonna kind of tear down our current view perhaps of work. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna rebuild our perspective of work based on what God has to say. Because in essence, your Heavenly Father says, work was not the idea of an economist, a government leader, entrepreneur. Work was my idea, and I want you to experience the blessing of it. So that's where we're going to go in this series. Now, to do that, we're going to talk about today either the number one or number two issue that I hear when I talk to people. If it's not number one, then next week's issue is going to be number one. It's either number one or number two, and it sounds something like this. When people talk to me about, I'm not satisfied with my job and my career and all that, we talk through this, and here's what they say. They kind of look around and make sure nobody's listening, and they say, Jeff, I'm glad I have a job. And for those of you, by the way, who are in career transition, you're gonna find that next job, but you can relate to this as well. I say, Jeff, I'm glad I have a job, but when I drive away at the end of the day, I just wish I had purpose. I wish my job had meaning. I wish I was making a bigger purpose, bigger difference in life. I just wish I had a job with purpose. And so what we're gonna do, because I hear this all the time, we've gotta ask a question. And the question we gotta ask is, okay, if that's how you feel, and I understand that, then what is the purpose of work? All right, so what we're doing is we're rebuilding the perspective of work. And here's where we're gonna go for a little bit today, all right? You'll never, when it comes to purpose, we wanna talk about purpose, you'll never understand your purpose at work until you understand the purpose of work. You'll never understand your purpose at work until you understand the purpose of work. So we can't get here until we get here. So we're gonna ask this simple question, and it seems like a simple question, but it's maybe a little bit more tricky than you might think. What is the purpose of work? What's the purpose of work? Now, I've asked this question time and time again. In fact, if you were to come and talk to me about your job or your career, this series is basically what I would tell you. And so when I ask the question, what is the purpose of work? Here's the four answers I get in one level or another. Number one is this one. Pay the bills, pay the bills. As the old bumper sticker says, I owe, off to work I go. All right, so there's that one. Number two is success. There's a measure of success. Some people see work as a measure of success. This, by the way, is why we have high school reunions right here. Number three, for some people, it's identity. It gives them an identity. And here's what I mean by that. When you meet someone and they say, oh, nice to meet you, what's your name? You say your name, and then what's the next question they ask you? What do you do? Okay, so there's identity that's in this mix as well. And then number four, money, 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 money. Right, I gotta get the new iPhone 24, man. I gotta do that. I gotta get that. I gotta go on my dream vacation. And hey, that's cool, I understand that, all right? But here's the point, don't miss this, don't miss this. I'm not saying anything of this is evil, sinful, wrong, but not a single one of these, not a single one of them is the original foundational purpose of work, not a single one. And maybe, just maybe, the reason so many people, almost 80% of us, by the way, are deeply dissatisfied and we can't find the purpose of work is that we've never understood the purpose of work. And you will never understand your purpose at work until you understand the purpose of work. So, what is the purpose of work? That's where we're going. And God, in essence, our humble Savior, kind of raises his hand, if you will, and says, I want to teach you what the purpose of work is, all right? So to do that, we gotta go way back to the very beginning in Genesis, all right? And when you ask people, hey, and people that might be familiar with the Bible, when was work first referenced in the Bible? Many people would point to Genesis chapter 3. So let me give you a little bit of the context of this story. God creates this incredible universe, this incredible earth. He creates this incredible place called the Garden of Eden. He places Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's a perfect place, so perfect that he says, hey, I'm gonna place perfect love in this garden, which means that you have a choice to obey me and follow me, or a choice to disobey me and not follow me. But if you disobey me, the whole thing's gonna fall apart. You know the story, Adam and Eve disobey, the whole thing falls apart. And then as a consequence of that, work is introduced, or work rather is referenced in Genesis chapter 3. And this is what God says to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. He says, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, anybody been there before? By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground. Now, you may hear this and go, Jeff, I don't believe in the Adam and Eve story. Good grief. Hey, I understand that, I respect that, but you've experienced this verse before. You've toiled before, right? You've toiled in a cubicle, you've toiled in real estate, you've toiled in landscaping, you've toiled making lunches for the kids, you've toiled creating a presentation, you've toiled. We've all been there, and you understand what sweat of the brow is. So for many people think work is a curse from God because of what happened in the disobedience of Adam and Eve. But this is not the first place that work is referenced in the Bible. Work is actually referenced before the fall. Work is introduced not as a curse, but as a blessing. Because when God has everything perfectly just the way he wants it, he says this, he comes up with an idea. Genesis chapter 2 says this. Genesis chapter 2 says this, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden too, and there's our word, work. To work it and take care of it. So God has this beautiful dwelling, and he goes, oh, I got a great idea. I'm going to create work as a blessing. And here's what you got to understand, and this is where we get confused, all right? God did not curse work. God cursed the conditions surrounding work, okay? God didn't curse work, he cursed the conditions around work, which means that even if you have a stressful day, even if you have a difficult boss, even if sales aren't going exactly the way you want them, you can still, even if people throw cows on the field, you can still experience the blessing of work. And you can begin to shrink the gap between your day job and your dream job. But that still begs the question, what is the purpose of work? Well, fortunately for us, many, many years after this, there was a businessman that appeared on the world stage. He was a tent maker. He sold tents for a living. He also was a church starter, a theologian, a writer, and his name was Paul. And he wrote a letter to a church that he helped start, a letter that we call the book of Colossians. And in Colossians chapter 3, Paul, in my humble estimation, writes the definitive statement of the purpose of work. This is the definitive, if you want to understand what the purpose of work is, God, through Paul, says, here it is, here it is. And it can be a game changer in how we view work. And this is how it starts. Colossians chapter 3 says this, verse 23. He starts with this. He says, whatever you do, which is really important because when I talk to people, here's what I hear, okay? They say, hey, Jeff, should I go down this career path or should I go down this career path? Should I take this job or should I take that job? And those are really important questions. But what Paul would say to that is, whatever. Hey, should I go this industry or should I go that industry? Paul says, whatever. Because the what is not the preeminent issue. And this is why so many people are dissatisfied with work, because we think the what we do is the preeminent issue. Now, is what we do important? Absolutely important. In fact, we're gonna talk about what next week, so don't miss next week. But what Paul is introducing, it's not the what that's most important, it's something else. And when you understand the something else, you'll understand the purpose of work. And why is that important? It's important because you'll never understand your purpose at work until you understand the purpose of work. So he introduces the purpose of work in the other part of the verse. This is what he says, Colossians 3, 23 and 24. This is the definitive statement of work. He says this. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. By the way, did you know that your work is tied into a reward in heaven? Pretty interesting, challenging thought, isn't it? Then he goes on to just reemphasize who you're working for. He says, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. So as we rebuild our perspective of work, Paul says it's not what you do that's the most important thing, it's who you are working for. And just as a reminder, you are working for the Lord. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And then he has this little line here, work at it with all of your heart. In essence, what Paul is saying is this: the purpose of your life at work is to understand who you are working for. And when you understand who you are working for, it should impact what you do. And here's how this says. This is how we say it. The purpose of your life at work is to show that God is at work in your life. This is the purpose of work, by the way. The purpose of your life at work is to show that God is at work in your life. That work was given to us as a platform for us to show the world how great and how wonderful and how mighty and how powerful and how awesome God is. That's why when Paul says, you have to remember that you're working for the Lord, so work at it with all of your heart.